Good afternoon. I want to just start by saying thank you so much for inviting me here to speak with you today. It is such a pleasure and an honor to work with educators and to speak with educators, in large part because I firmly believe that what we're all doing with kids is so vital. And I mean that in both senses of that word. It's vital, it's energetic, it's lively, it's full of life, vita, right? And it's also of vital importance to our children and to our future. So I just want to start there by saying thank you, thank you, thank you for the work that you do with children. I can think of nothing more important that you could be doing with your time. So the subtitle of my talk today is Heirloom Variety Education. And you're not supposed to know what that means yet, so don't worry. Hopefully that will be clear by the end. But I want to just find out by a raise of hands, how many of you have grown some kind of heirloom variety, fruit or vegetable, in your life, in your garden? Great. Maybe a rough-skinned apple or a purple carrot or a stripy green tomato, right? That'll be, again, important soon, and you'll see why. So I grew up not in a gardening family or community, really, and I grew up thinking of apples as just those waxy, kind of mealy snacks that were on the cafeteria tray. I came well into my adult life thinking that I didn't much care for apples. And now, all these years later, I work at Life Lab, and Life Lab is a nonprofit where we cultivate a love of learning and of healthy food and of nature through garden-based field trips and summer camp programs. And Life Lab we also in this work train educators. That's my role at Life Lab. And Life Lab is located on a larger UC Santa Cruz farm where over 200 varieties of apples are grown. And I will be honest with you, I've been there 8 years and I still cannot get over the incredible textures and flavors of some of these apples. I mean, they're to die for. I just love them. And now I also have the pleasure of seeing kids on our field and summer camp programs all the time just going bananas over the winter banana apple or the wine sap, both of which are apples, or my personal favorite, the Newtown Pippin. They go crazy for these apples because those flavors, the textures and the flavors, are so vibrant in these apples. And isn't that how our children come to us as well? They're just so intensely, infectiously vibrant. And just like heirloom apples, our children come to us with really incredible and important stories of how they and their ancestors before them came to be where they are today. So if these apples are, with these beautiful histories, are so delicious, why aren't they more common on the grocery store shelves? Why aren't they more common in the bowls and in our snack rooms, in hotels and things? Well, in large part, as I'm sure many of you know, it's because they're not uniform, right? Some of them might have bumpy or rough skin. Sometimes their different sizes will make them difficult to harvest or to pack or to refrigerate or to ship. And so in a world of industrialized agriculture where ease of transport and ease of harvest are such top priorities, some of these apples just simply haven't made the cut. Just a moment, please. So if it weren't for a small group of really dedicated and visionary farmers who protected some of these amazing apple varieties, who decided to cultivate them, who had a broader idea of what is a perfect apple worth cultivation. If it weren't for some of these farmers, this might be all we had left of apples. And I'm here today because I'm concerned that we might be making the same mistake in education today. For far too long, for about at least the last decade and a half, public education funding and policy, not always practice, but funding and policy has been really narrowly focused on just a couple of characteristics that are worth cultivation. And namely, those are the characteristics that show up on math or language arts test scores. And we have left everything else that makes up a well-rounded child. Curiosity, creativity, vitality, compassion. We're leaving all of that up to chance. And I would argue that it's time for us as educators to learn from those heirloom farmers and to create a much broader definition of what we think of as characteristics worth cultivating. And that the garden is an ideal space to do that. So that's what I see as our challenge as educators. And so many practicing educators, this is what we're in the business of doing. That's why we're here. Is to take a really big picture look at what are the skills, the knowledge, the characteristics and qualities that our children are going to need to lead this world into the future. And think about how can we cultivate those characteristics in our kids through education. So as a middle school science teacher, now as a university lecturer, in all of my teaching, I always kind of look at the people who are making the world a better place in some way. They're getting clean drinking water into villages that need it, or they're fighting for human rights, or they're doing their part to make this world better. And I look for what are the common characteristics that these people have, and how can we cultivate those characteristics in children? And here are some patterns I found. Everyone who's really working hard to make the world a better place has a deep knowledge of the issue they've taken up, whatever that issue is. They also have enough concern about that issue, they have enough compassion and concern to motivate them, right, to take action. And lastly, they have a sense of empowerment. They have a sense of themselves that, hey, I can do something about this. And I believe that the garden is an ideal space for cultivating those characteristics. So I'm going to start with deep knowledge. So many of us in the garden cultivate deep knowledge through hands-on learning. And there's a real difference. Many of you have ever heard me speak before, have heard me say it, because I say it a lot. There's a real difference between knowing about something and knowing something. When a child feeds their food scraps to a worm in the worm bin, and then they harvest some of those worm castings from the worm bin, and they find a little worm, and they say hi to it and connect with it, and then they take their worm castings, and they bring it over to a garden bed to feed the plants, and then they wriggle a carrot out of that garden bed and wash it and eat it right out of the ground like that. That child knows that there's a cycle of life. They know that matter cycles. They know that healthy food is delicious. And they know right down in their bones that they're part of a big, magnificent web of life. That's deep knowledge. The garden also happens to be an ideal space for cultivating deep knowledge around traditional academic content, like math and language arts. This is a photo of a student who came to a summer school that we hosted at Life Lab that was for middle school and, going into middle school, from 5th grade into 6th grade, students who were at risk of retention. And they came up to this summer school to try to get out of being at risk of retention so that they could go into 6th grade, and we taught the science part at Life Lab. And this student, the girl holding the graph, had conducted an experiment on snails' food preferences to figure out what kind of food snails like the best. And I love this picture, because in this picture, this is the final day of the summer school, and the families were invited, and she's sharing the results of her experiment with her family. And you can think of all of the math and English language that's going into that, right? The math of measuring and graphing her results and analyzing them, the language of explaining this to her family and to others, to her peers and to her teachers. And even more than that, look, I hope you can see it in the background, I'm not sure, but the look on her face and on her family's faces, you can see a look of pride in their eyes as she has stepped into the role of an active scientist who's presenting her findings. That's what happens, right? When we take learning outside of the classroom and into a space that is meaningful to students and where they can actually practice being scientists. And so I want to make sure that nobody gets me wrong about math and language arts. I don't think it's unimportant. I think it's critical. It's just a small piece of a much larger puzzle of what makes a kid ready for this world, right? And the garden is such a great place to build it. Of course, knowledge is not the only thing that we cultivate in children in the garden. I'm going to ask all of you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that, and either way, to think of an outdoor space that was important to you growing up. And I'm going to let it be quiet for a minute so you can just kind of go through your file catalog in your head and find that place that was important to you. It might be a body of water, might be an empty lot, could be a garden or a tree. So take a minute to think of that space. Try to remember what it looked like in all directions. So try to look around that space in your mind and even look up to the sky and down to the ground to see what you see. See if you can remember what it smelled like, or if there's anything to eat, what it tasted like. See if you can remember the sounds that were in that space. I'm going to ask you now to open your eyes and find someone at your table, ideally, if possible, someone you didn't know when you got to this conference. Introduce yourself and tell them about that space. But I'm a teacher, so before I turn you off to do that, I've got to teach you the callback. So you're going to be all chatting with your person, telling them about your outdoor space that was important to you growing up. But when you see me do this is the quiet coyote. As soon as you see this, you're going to finish up your sentence real quick, put up your tall, quiet coyote so other people can see it, and that's your signal to get quiet and turn up here. On the off chance that your conversations are just booming so much that nobody has any idea that I'm up here doing this, I always can howl like a coyote to reinforce it. So, when you see the coyote or hear the coyote, you'll stop, but now introduce yourself and tell someone about your outdoor childhood space. Let's be honest, you are like so much better than a group of 32nd graders.
What does the coyote sound like?
I don't know how close to me the microphone is. That's the callback I use when they're, scattered with four winds, like doing a scavenger hunt all around the garden or something, and this is not going to happen. Then I teach them the coyote howl. My friend Nathan, who's here in the audience, who just led you in Busano, has written a beautiful book called Teaching in Nature's Classroom. It'll be out soon, and it's a guiding principles of garden-based education. And he included a great quote that I want to read you from The Thunder Tree by Robert Pyle. Pyle writes, "Even if they don't know my ditch, most people I speak with have a ditch somewhere, on a creek, meadow, woodlot, or marsh, that they hold in similar regard. These are places of initiation, where the borders between ourselves and other creatures break down, where the earth gets under our nails and a sense of place gets under our skin." This is one of the things I love about school gardens, community gardens, just gardens, is that they can be anywhere. And that means that any child in any place, despite this urbanization and suburbanization of our country and of the world, any child in any place can have their ditch, right? They can have their special outdoor space, like the ones that you just shared, where they can feel part of something much larger than themselves, and a place that they can call their own. In my time at Life Lab, I've taught educator workshops both at our site in Santa Cruz, but also all across the country, everywhere from Brooklyn, New York, to Las Vegas, Nevada, to Little Rock, Arkansas. And in all of these spaces, educators just like you are creating these kind of outdoor classrooms for children so that they have that same experience that a child growing up in the 1800s on the farm would have. Not the whole experience, but a taste of it, so that they have an outdoor space to call their own. And they have those experiences regularly. It's not a big once-in-a-lifetime field trip, right? They're out there daily, weekly, getting to touch the soil, getting to hold a worm in their hands, getting to pick food right off of a plant. And I just think that's critical. It's critical in part because we know that people protect what they love. I recently heard a beautiful and really useful and interesting definition of love as sustained, compassionate attention. And I think that when we give kids the opportunity to pay sustained, compassionate attention to a space outdoors, we give them the opportunity to fall in love with it. And that is our best hope of raising a generation that's going to take care of this planet.
Beautiful.
My friend and colleague, Caprice Potter, is a garden teacher in Santa Cruz, and she told me a beautiful story about this, really sweet. She brought her students out to see the monarchs that were there on her milkweed plants, and there were a lot of monarchs, and the kids were all checking them out. And then a girl also found a snail there, and they have a little place called Snail Haven that's protected, bordered off from their garden where they put their snails and care for them. And so she sent the girl to Snail Haven to put her snail there. And when Caprice came back into her office, which is actually a greenhouse in the garden later that day, there was a note on her desk. And that girl had written the following note that she left on Caprice's desk. "Today I saw more wildlife than I have ever seen in one place. And when I was in Snail Haven, I cried for the beauty of the day." It's one thing to have deep knowledge of space, of a concept, etc. It's another thing to care about it. And it's yet a third thing to have a sense of empowerment, to feel like I am part of this, and I can do something about it. This summer, my family and I went to some of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. We went on a camping trip through the Canadian Rockies, and it was phenomenal. And I did notice, even at some of these places like this waterfall that we had to hike out to, that there was litter and cigarette butts and people were leaving things. And of course we ask ourselves, and my 5-year-old asks me, why did they leave this here? He's appalled, which I'm very proud of him for. But I think it's a really good question, especially, like I said, at places that you hike out to. I mean, obviously the people who are there, these are people who like this space. They've invested time to get there. Why would that be happening? And I would argue that in part it's because they're disconnected from their impact. And I think there's a general tendency for people to feel really independent of the world around them. That here's me, there's the world, and there's not a lot of connection there. That is so obviously not true for students in a garden, right? How many of you have seen children, by a raise of hands, that once they've planted a seed, they become very protective of it, or a plant? How many of you have seen that protective tendency? Yeah, of course, absolutely. When a child plants a little seed and then they see the little sprout emerging and they say, my bean is being born, right? And they're watering it, they're caring for it, and they're weeding it. Oh no, you are not going to step on that bed, right? They're protective, they care for it. Maria Montessori has a beautiful quote on this exact idea. She says, when he knows that the life of the plant that has been sown depends upon his care in watering it, without which the little plant dries up, the child becomes vigilant as one who is beginning to feel a mission in life. So this is what I mean by heirloom variety education. I mean broadening our idea of all that is worth cultivation, just like those farmers that protected our treasured heirloom apple trees. Broadening our definition to include more than test scores, that's a piece of it, sure, but broadening it to include a sense of place, a sense of purpose and possibility, and a deep fundamental connection and sense of knowledge of the world around us. And this is the time to do it. I am so thrilled by all of the synergy that I have felt here at this conference and all of the people moving this garden-based learning movement forward. And I know that many of you work directly in schools. By a raise of hands, how many of you work directly in schools? You have programs in schools, great. And many of you work alongside schools and support schools. How many more of you are working somehow in collaboration with schools? Great. And so I want to briefly talk about the huge sea change that is happening in public education across our country today. And I'll keep this brief because I know some of you are very familiar with it. But there are new education standards being rolled out in almost every state across the country called Common Core, Math and Language Arts. And that rollout, that implementation has been very rocky at best. It's definitely controversial, but I want to focus today on the potential that it holds for garden-based education. Because the new Common Core Math and Language Arts standards have an explicit focus in every grade, kinder through 12, on real-life connections in language arts and real-world problems in math. Every grade. What is the garden, if not real life in the real world? This is our chance to just seamlessly integrate into the goals of the school because that is what they're being asked to do by Common Core. The same is true with the next generation science standards that are being adopted in many states. That there's now a focus on practices and the practices of science. And this is the heart of our name, Life Lab, that the garden is a living laboratory where students can be scientists, just like that girl you saw that was presenting her findings. So this is an incredible time for us to be trying to integrate into this public school system. Meanwhile, the shortcomings of this narrow focus that I talked about on math and language art scores, well, those shortcomings are coming into the spotlight in mainstream education now. And mainstream experts are speaking to this problem and are advocating for newfound commitment to cultivating a broader range of characteristics like critical thinking and creativity and collaboration. So the wind is truly at our backs right now as we fight to reclaim the heart of education. So, gardens have all of this incredible potential to grow the leaders the world needs. But that doesn't mean that if we just build a couple raised beds and install them in a school or install them in a library or a museum or a botanical garden, then poof, we're raising a generation of leaders for tomorrow, right? We all know that many school gardens and other public gardens look like this, right? So I want to talk about a few key factors that I think of as keys to success that are often overlooked. And And I'll start with something that I heard Ellen Robinson say from Real School Gardens in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And she said, school gardens are like puppies. Everyone wants one. But not everyone has really taken full account of the work that will be involved in maintaining it. And in my work as the Lifelong Education Director, I had the absolute pleasure and privilege, as I said, of training educators in schools across the country. And here's a big pattern I've seen. All of the thriving school gardens have clear plans, not just for installation, but for ongoing maintenance. From Boston to DC to Madison, Wisconsin to Ashland, Missouri, in many, many places, schools and nonprofits are collaborating to pay garden coordinators. In other places, there's a very robust, organized way for the city master gardeners, parent committees, service and volunteer corps to organize to maintain these school gardens. In Las Vegas, a nonprofit called Green Our Planet pays a landscaping company to go out and maintain the gardens. There are a lot of different models for this. But the next obvious question for all of those models that I mentioned that involve money is, where in the world does that money come from? Again, we've seen a lot of great models for this. Everything from bond measures to soda taxes and parcel taxes that have institutionalized funding. I got an email this morning that Oregon State Legislature passed a funding measure for statewide school garden support. Where that's not happening, we've also seen really powerful work done with grant writing or with crowdsourcing of funds, Kickstarter campaigns, etc., but on a large scale that are supporting gardens across regions. The model that will work in any given region depends on so many factors that make your region unique. But for anyone in here who's thinking, I really want to get this going and off the ground, or I am trying to do this and I want more ideas, at LifeLab we're really committed to this idea of regional school garden support. And so we've tried to document all of these great practices that we're seeing out of San Francisco, out of Madison, Wisconsin, out of DC, etc. So we have a school gardens regional support webpage and webinar, a whole hour-long webinar class on this topic. So there are places to learn the details, the kind of nitty-gritty behind all of these organizations that have figured it out. The second key to success that I think is often overlooked is preparing and supporting professional educators. Just like the classroom, the power of what happens in an educational garden will be determined almost entirely by the effectiveness of the educator. But with this kind of limbo land of gardens between formal education and informal education, there's really been little clarity on what a garden educator would need to know to be effective and where they could get those skills. It's not a credentialing program in most universities, and even when you're hiring for this job, it's not even clear which degree would be most useful. Is it horticulture? Is it community organizing? Is it education? So what's the result? The result is we have a huge amount of really well-intentioned, passionate people going into school gardens only to be run over by 30 kindergartners who are just not listening to directions, right? Or really well-intentioned, super spunky educators who plant all their cucumbers and then, oh shoot, the harvest is when the kids are at summer break. Right? There's so many possible pitfalls for garden educators because there's so many skills that we need, everything from crop planning to classroom management. And there's a lot to learn. It's actually just like those puppies, right? Just like getting a new puppy, there's a lot to learn. So in 8 years now at LifeLab doing these trainings, I have definitely seen that the best garden education programs provide training and ongoing support for their educators, and they give them clear goals and workshops, curricula, and ongoing support to meet those goals. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here. You understand the value of professional development. That's why you're here at one of the largest, most well-established conferences on this topic in the nation. By a show of hands, how many of you also take this role in your regions? How many of you also train other educators, formal or informal? Great, wow, so nice. So at LifeLab, one of the reasons we believe so strongly in this practice and we invest so much in it is because we've seen that it works. And we surveyed educators who had come to one of our workshops anywhere in the country. And we surveyed all of them the year after the workshop to see how they saw that it had impacted their teaching and how it had impacted their students. And as you can see, the results were phenomenal in terms of their motivation to take kids outside, the times they would bring kids outside, and then what they saw in their students' changes in their enthusiasm for learning, in their cooperation and creativity, in their healthy eating choices, etc. So everyone has a unique kind of pathway that got them into garden-based learning. Probably after hearing me speak now, you will not be surprised to hear that my unique pathway was through environmental education. And I originally became a middle school science teacher after teaching outdoor ed because I wanted to integrate outdoor hands-on experiential learning, kind of elevate the status of that in daily school life. And these were my students at my middle school in Pescadero where I taught. And when I came to Life Lab, I was actually completely surprised to find out, to meet lots of people who were in this field for completely different reasons than me. I thought we were all just kind of back to the earth, hippies, whatever. But I got there and there was this phrase that I kept hearing, oh, we use the garden as a vehicle for, and it became this kind of like revolving fill-in-the-blank situation. Like, oh, we use it as a vehicle for reducing obesity rates. Oh, well, we're using it to bring math and learn language arts to life, or for youth empowerment and food justice, for growing fresh produce, for building character. I almost forget this one, but a really big one is for teaching kids how to garden, right? How to grow things. And I honestly, my first thought was like, what a coincidence, you know? These like food justice advocates and these public health obesity people and these teachers and science educators and environmentalists, and we're all using the same instructional strategy, all with seemingly really good results. Wow, what a shock, what a big coincidence. It's taken me a while to realize that this is not a coincidence. We have been gardening with children for 10,000 years since the dawn of agriculture. We've been harvesting and eating with children since our species was around. This is not a coincidence that this is so effective. I was recently in a meeting with some curriculum writers, some science curriculum writers, and they were sort of doing a cost-benefit analysis of whether or not they should create a garden-based science resource. And they asked me, how can we be sure this isn't just a passing fad, you know? Are there any statistics on this that show the growth of this movement? And, you know, what's going to happen when Michelle Obama isn't in the White House anymore? Is this all going to kind of fade away? And honestly, in a way, those are really good questions. I was really taken aback, and it took me a little while to figure out why. But this is why. Because we have been doing this since time began. It's really this that was the fad. It's the past 70 or so years where a child has been able to survive and grow up without any tangible connection to the land or to where their food came from. That's the fad. That was a blip. That is a blip on our historical scene. And I really now, as we're seeing the tremendous fallout from that, the public health fallout, the environmental fallout, the kind of apathy in student, the lack of engagement. Now, of course, formal and informal educators are beginning to realize that we need to build a bridge back to that practice by which every person everywhere can discover their connection to the world of which we're all a part. Calling gardening with kids a fad is like calling my beloved Newtown pippin apple a fad. The first apple evolved over 1 million years ago on 20,000-foot jagged peaks between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The seeds were dispersed by bears and wild horses, and much later, when the Silk Road came in between China and Rome, dispersed by people. The ancient Greeks and Romans loved their apples, and through the Dark Ages, the art of grafting was kept alive in the monasteries. When the first European settlers came to this country, they brought apple seeds. And the apple trees that grew cross-pollinated with the native crab apples here. And thousands of new varieties were born right here on our soils. In the 1700s, right when the settlers in America were kind of remembering and relearning the art of grafting, the Newtown pippin apple came up just as a chance seedling in New York State, which is lucky because, you know, apples don't come through to seeds, so you could get just about anything. But there it was. It became a favorite of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and it's still a favorite of mine and many others today. So just like garden-based education, the Newtown pippin may be popular right now, but this is not a fad. This is not going anywhere. It's a survivor who made it through a rocky period during which most people overlooked it, and whose best qualities are just beginning to be remembered and appreciated again. lot of this talk on building the leaders that we need for a brighter tomorrow, but I'd like to wrap up by focusing on what kids need. Time outdoors is restorative. We know this instinctively, and research has proven it. I just saw in the New York Times yesterday that the doctors are starting to talk about prescribing time outdoors because of the tangible benefits that it has on calming people down. I mean, like measurable, cortisol and heart rate. And they want to prescribe hiking outdoors. When we take kids into our outdoor classrooms, we give them the opportunity to recharge. We give them the chance to discover a love of healthy food. That's my son with the broccoli. And we give them the chance to know, without a doubt, that they are part of something big and beautiful. We owe this to our kids. So like the apple farmers who saved my treasured pippin from oblivion, this is what you're doing. You are preserving the qualities in children that are simply too important to ignore anymore. They are too important to be lost. Their vibrancy, their diversity, their resilience. And so again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you do to give children all that they deserve. I'll open it up for questions now. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I'll say right now, I may or may not have an answer to your question, but I'm happy to take any that you have.
I have one. I'll speak up.
I'll repeat it too.
I'm a volunteer. I was a classroom teacher in my former life, but we're putting in a children's garden, and what has been my motivation is to share with our community and the world how important plants are. Plants came first. Without plants, we do not have food, we do not have oxygen. Is that too big a subject to try to educate young children? How do I get that big concept down to a place where a 5-year-old can understand?
Great. So the question was, if your big picture idea is just that plants are so important, is that too big a concept to try to teach to young children? And I'm sure there are many opinions in the room, although maybe not, and maybe we all agree. I would say that is absolutely a perfect message to be trying to get across to young children. In teacher school, they teach us about backwards design and planning your lessons with an enduring understanding in mind. And what you just said to me, I feel is an enduring understanding. An enduring understanding is an idea or a concept that the kid's not just going to remember at the end of the school day. They're not just going to remember at the end of the school year on their final exam. This is they're going to remember 20 or 30 years from now. And I think that the idea that we need plants to live, that's an enduring understanding. That's an idea that if you teach it really well at a really young age, a child will never forget it. And in terms of how to teach it, which you asked, someone here, maybe it was the man who introduced me, I'm not sure, but at one of the workshops I went to, someone said, science doesn't happen in 50 minutes. But yeah. So I would argue that in order to achieve that big picture understanding, it's gradual, right? It's doing things like bringing your 5-year-olds over to the plant, and here's the leaf of the plant, and teaching them how to say, thank you, green plant. And give them that carbon dioxide, and now I'm going to breathe in some oxygen, and everybody fill up your lungs with that oxygen from that leaf. It's giving them experience after experience like that, where again, they can know it right down in their bones. Oh, this is the plant that I pick and eat off of. Food comes from plants. This is the plant that I breathe from. Oxygen comes from plants. This is the cotton that my clothes are made out of. I just pulled it right off of a plant. And over time, that knowledge just sinks in deeper and deeper. Anyone else? Thank you for the questions. Yes, Sam.
Sure. I have a question about training. You talked about, and we have the same issue in DC, we're such a diverse audience, people coming in with all kinds of backgrounds. What suggestions do you have to ensure that you are addressing the needs of those audiences when you do the trainings?
Great. So how do we address the needs of a really diverse audience in our trainings? Great question. We're thinking about it all the time. And, a couple things come to mind. If we're working ongoing with the same group, if we've kind of adopted a group of teachers, then we can survey them ahead of time to find out, what do you already know? What do you want to know? And then you have the opportunity to sort of cater it. Like, well, folks who need a little gardening 101, folks who are not yet comfortable with planting and watering, we're going to meet over here with John, and you're going to learn about bed prep. And folks who are already good with that and want to know more about Common Core, come on over here and meet with me. And so there's that option to kind of differentiate, and is the teacher term, right? But there's not always that option, right? Because you might just have 25 people, they all signed up for the day, and some are master gardeners, some don't know anything about gardening, etc. And so in that case, what we found really works is to kind of have, within any section of our workshop, we'll have a dual focus. So for example, when we do the gardening part, like this is how you plant a bed. Well, I'm going to be teaching the basics of prepping a bed and how much compost to add and how to know if it's the right soil moisture, etc. But then, for the sake of the master gardeners who are there who know more about that than I do, I'm also going to be saying things like, when we're doing this with kids, these are the special tools we use. And this is a little chant we use to get them involved so that they're getting something else out of it. Meanwhile, at the end of any of these sections, every 10 minutes or so, I'm going to say, who here has planted seeds with kids? What other suggestions do you have about doing that? So that they get a chance to learn from one another. Because, this is a great example. People in this room have so much experience teaching in gardens. Collectively, we probably have thousands of years of experience, right? But none of us is bored, right? Because we're learning from each other and we're getting new ideas from everyone else in the conference as well as from the presenters. So building in a lot of time for people to teach each other and learn from each other helps a lot. Anyone else? I think we have time for a couple more. Yeah.
Thanks, Whitney.
Yeah.
We're going to have to invite you to Canada sometime to speak. But my question would be kind of connected to how do we create stronger bridges and maybe scale up to the idea of helping children and then definitely youth understand the context of agriculture. Even larger scale, the reality of what is happening on the landscape in terms of agriculture production, the realities of how do we bring enough food in order to feed cities. But going forward in terms of maintaining that same kind of wonder and that ethic that comes with that, in terms of responsible stewardship and management, and how do we bridge going from the garden into the larger scale of agriculture? That'd be my question. So whether you have experiences or different models of things that you've been exposed to or involved in.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's trickier, isn't it? Because it's hard to make it hands-on when you start to talk about food processing and even maybe, like highly processed foods. Well, that's not even something we are doing on the farm, and now are we going to get into a factory to look at it, or how are we going to do this? So I would say a couple of things. Sometimes literature can really help, as we saw with the beautiful book, Giving Thanks, just to sort of open people's eyes to all the pieces that are involved in a food system. But looking for opportunities to make that hands-on, I think, is critical. And so any kind of food preparation or food processing place where you can take a tour, that kind of thing, I think making it real for students helps, because even as adults, what do I know about how high fructose corn syrup is made? I've read about it, but I don't really get it, and so I think the more we could do to make it real for kids, the better. And aligning yourself with your local farmers to be able to go out to farming plants, to packaging plants, and so that they can see, that whole process to where they get their jar of applesauce. Well, here's where it was grown, here's where it was packaged, here are the people that do that, here's what they have to say about that work. That all really helps kind of ground truth our knowledge about the food system. But it's not easy. Yeah?
I work at a school where we all teach kindergarten. Each classroom has its own garden box. We, involve the kids. It's awesome. You showed the picture of the pizza, where kids go home and they get the pizza from parents. So how do you get parental buy-in? to kind of make it, that entire buy-in process. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing our part at school, and the kids are getting what they need and owning it.
Yeah.
But how do we bridge that gap?
Great, thank you, great question. Again, I think it's gradual. Some of it will happen just through the kids, through osmosis. Your kids are going to be talking to them, and over time, and eventually your kids are going to be parents, right? So that's the really gradual picture. But some tangible things that we've done, or that I've done to get parent buy-in right away are integrated as much as possible. So when I was a middle school teacher, when we had back to school night, if the parents wanted to talk to me, I was in the garden. And everyone wants to talk to a teacher on back to school night, right? They want to hear what's going on in science class and how's my kid doing and blah, blah, blah. So that station, rather than being in the classroom, was in the garden. Well, they're in the garden, they go, oh, what's this about? Oh, this is our outdoor science classroom. We use it just like we use our indoor science classroom. Oh, how can I get, would you like to get involved? Can I get your name and contact information here, right? So garden work days are another similar story, right? Like inviting them to participate and making that as accessible and fun as possible. So if you're going to have a garden work day, planning it on a weekend or a time when working parents can be there, whatever issues exist that would be barriers for your community, try to find those issues and address them. We're going to have dinner there. We're going to have, water for you there, etc. And you're going to learn this there. And giving them ample opportunities to get involved, and I think helps a lot, and making it, again, really fun and rewarding for them. But it's gradual, it's slow. And even if you get them to help in the garden, that doesn't mean they're changing their diets at home. I mean, it is a tall order, but I think it's piece by piece. The last thing I'll say about that is we don't ever jump out ahead of where people are at. So for example, if we invite parents up and their kids have been part of our program, but this is their first time there, we're not going to feed them like a kale stir fry. Because they're going to be like, oh, I don't eat that food. Maybe in Santa Cruz they will say, oh yeah, that's what I eat at home too. But we always try to start with something real simple, like, oh, we're making pizzas. We happen to be making them with lots and lots of vegetables on top that we've harvested right here from our garden, but kind of start there and then work our way. So we try to start with things that parents are really comfortable with, that they're excited about, that's in their language, that has a lot of rewarding elements for them. And then build out from there to where they would actually be really invested in doing work with us. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question if there are any more. Are there any more questions? Yes, right there.
You showed us you had a model for different models for funding. I was curious, do you know of any group out there that have models of how teachers or botany directors, chemical directors can stay in touch with each other? Because when we leave a place like this, you go out to your school or you start your own thing, and it's kind of hard to keep the momentum and the passion and stay in touch. We started an awesome school garden network here. About one or two really strong volunteers that has a model for staying connected once you leave it home.
It's a great question. So I'm part of, and John, you just come up here if you're like, this is what she really needs to say, because he's sort of the guru on this, but I'm going to do my very best. I'm part of something called the National School Garden Network, and that is a network that it's online. It's phenomenal for people like us who are overseeing multiple school gardens. And within that thread, you can ask questions like, how do you manage your regional school garden network? So there are a lot of regions, for example, who use a Yahoo group or who have set up a Facebook page, those kinds of things. But you can see those different models. The person who's in charge of the Sonoma School Garden Group or the New York City School Garden Group will be on the National School Garden Network, and they'll say, this is how we set it up, and here are the pitfalls, and here's what we recommend. So National School Garden Network is a wonderful networking opportunity for support organizations, like many of us have, and it's searchable. So if you say, oh, I want to search for models for memorandums of understanding with other schools, then you can search for that, and if anybody's posted on it, which that's an example, so they have, then you get 13 different districts who have done that. So that would be a place to get a lot of different ideas to pull from. The ones that I've heard of working really well regionally, local ones are digital Yahoo and Facebook groups, and then periodic in-person meetings. In Santa Cruz, we do 4 meetings a year. We provide food. We provide an agenda that we think will be really rich, like come and learn about the new standards, or come and brainstorm about outdoor classroom management, things we know teachers really want. And then whoever wants to come can come. Yeah. All right, well, thank you again so much. What a pleasure to speak with you and work with you this whole weekend, and enjoy the rest of the conference.